But when we have something that scares us in that way that's saying, you might feel a little exposed, you might feel a little vulnerable, that's when you know you need to lean in and go a little further, because you know on the other side you're going to be better for it.
I'm Jack Smart. I'm the movie staff writer at People Magazine, but I am first and foremost tonight a Demi Moore fan. This year, as you all know, she starred in Feud vs. Capote and The Substance, and we will be talking about The Substance. I think it's safe to say a lot. But I'd like to start kind of at the very beginning. I think that there are actors and there are movie stars, and there's an overlap between the two, but I don't think there's a lot of overlap. I think of you as an actor with the technical skills and the versatility, and as the movie star with the charisma and with the audience that adores them. There aren't very many people who have both. Can I start with the actor side?
Start wherever you'd like.
What did you get bit by the acting bug?
So, my journey is very unique, as I feel like for most of us it is, but mine, I would like to say that I, had a theater background, that I, had a pull towards acting, but that isn't how it occurred. How it occurred for me is, I was living in an apartment building in West Hollywood with my single mother, and from my balcony, I looked down by the pool, and there was the most extraordinary creature I had ever encountered. She was the most self-possessed, most embodied young woman, and I didn't know who she was or what she had, but I knew I wanted that. We each were living with our single mothers, and we became fast friends. And she was a young German actress, a couple of years older. And she spoke English quite well, but she didn't feel confident reading. So she had me read her scripts aloud. And this was Nastasia Kinski. And she was brought to LA by Roman Polanski. And I think the combination of coming from where I came from in my life, my childhood, and witnessing, and I don't know if it's because she was European, but there was just something that she had combined with my first encounter with material, with storytelling in this form, that I think just planted the seed in the bug. And then from that point, I was like, how does this work? And so I just set about to try to figure out, what do you need to do this? What are those things? What are the basic elements? You need a headshot. You need an agent. And I figured I'd get around to the acting part later.
Okay, see, that's so interesting. To your point, everyone has a unique way into this, and some are drawn to the I want to be the movie star thing, and some are really interested in the craft. And it sounds like there's a combination for sure. But you knew, okay, now we have to figure out the industry, the business part of this. This is when I was 14, almost 15. Oh, okay.
This is teenager.
Okay.
Teenager
because
baby.
Soap opera was when you were about 19.
I landed General Hospital a month before my 19th birthday.
Okay, amazing. And describe the time before that. What were the auditions like? Was it lots of auditions? Was it open calls?
I think I went about and got an agent. I found an agent. I took those headshots, and then I started to be sent out on auditions, but quickly learned that as somebody who was just, say, at this point, maybe 15, going on 16, that usually actors that had been child actors were hired quite often because they'd been doing it so long, but generally they wanted somebody over 18 to play younger. And so between 16 and 18, I figured out if I modeled, I could pay the rent, because I moved out on my own at 16. And then at 18 is when it opened up. And yeah, I definitely went to the University of Fake It Till You Make It.
And as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, soap operas are that's university. That's a crash course.
I mean, I definitely learned so much. I mean, when you have to be so present, you can do your best to learn, 20 pages of dialogue. And it's that kind of constant turnover. The one thing I knew is I saw people, and I really appreciated those who had like found this is where they wanted to be. Like they were happy to do 30 plus years there, and I knew that that wasn't what I was looking for.
That's like you were gathering data about what kind of career you wanted.
I
love
definitely
that.
had a very practical side.
Yeah. Yeah. And at what point did you start to see, I'm guessing it's around the time that you started kind of getting lead roles in the mid 1980s, that there were your contemporaries. You were starting with people your age.
I mean, I think
ensemble
so.
movies.
While I was on the soap, I auditioned for a movie that could never be made today called Blame It on Rio.
Yes.
Never be made today. And so they gave,
Hilarious.
yeah, they allowed me to leave and go shoot that movie, and then come back and finish my contract on the soap. And then, once I finished my contract, not too long after that is when St. Elmo's Fire came across came my way.
Do you remember what it was like to look ahead to almost to now, to this moment, and to envision what you wanted from this career? Because if it's so cool to see, all right, you're with your soap opera co-stars and you know that you don't want that. Did you have a vision? Does it resemble anything like today?
I mean, I think, because I didn't come from a formal background, I didn't have that as a frame of reference. Everything came from the doing, the learning, from looking at other actors, from watching films. Like as a kid, I loved Katharine Hepburn. I lived for her. And so I think, and then as I had the privilege and the opportunity to start really doing films, bigger studio films, it was just being there on the set, watching other actors, asking questions, and without trying to look like I didn't really know what I was doing.
It's self-enacting exercise.
Yes.
That you're like putting on pro actor.
So I didn't have any like set sense. I think, look, I stepped into this with nothing to lose because I had nothing. And so for me, everything was about just seeing what was possible. I didn't know.
Absolutely. And I assume the directors, especially as a real young adult, that they must have been quite formative. Do you have like lessons that you've taken through your whole life from some of those early directors that you worked with?
I mean, no sweet anecdote is popping to mind.
Brutal.
I'm sorry. I mean, no particular. I have to come back to me on that one.
Well, the other thing is with the soap opera skills, you're talking about like processing 20 lines of dialogue. Are there technical skills that remain today, or is it all subconscious at this point and you've just got it down?
I think for me now, it's so much more of it is exploring the aspects that are beyond what I think I already know. So tapping much more into my unconscious to allow that to bring in more information that may be totally illogical, but aligns in a way that is in service to whatever part of a character that I'm creating.
This is the stuff I love. This is the nitty gritty, like getting your subconscious involved and learning how to trust your gut in that way. I love asking, when does a character tend to connect for you? Is it in the reading of the script or the rehearsing and the preparing, or on the day with the cameras rolling?
I think all of the above.
Okay, it's in multiple stages.
Yeah, I think it's in all I think when I read a script, you are taking in the whole. What's the story? What is it about? But you're looking at the character that's kind of geared for you, and at least for me, it's hard for me to not imagine like placing myself in it. And believe me, there's been many times when I've talked people out of casting me.
Okay, yeah.
Seriously, where I've said, I think there's somebody that actually is better.
Somebody specific, or is it just not you?
No, like literally, I've had moments where I think, who would be really great, and it's not because it wasn't good.
Have you gotten them cast?
I think there's a couple of times when
Probably. I don't know if you want to name
names. But often, I can say even with the substance, obviously I'm looking at this and I'm looking for what parts of me relate, what part of me understands or has a sense of my own knowing within something. And in some cases where it's more just I'm looking at something and is it something I don't know at all but want to?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I do think the substance is probably a brilliant example of what you're talking about, of discovering it in all of the stages of the thing, and we will get there. I promise us we will get there. Can I ask, because so many of those early films, and like I'm going to include Ghost kind of in this like category of like you play a lot of romance. I'm wondering if there's a key to is it developing chemistry with co-stars? Is it? I'm thinking for something like St. Elmo's Fire, you're speaking with contemporaries who are also kind of, maybe they were also faking it till they make it. Maybe you were also all learning together. How much did you guys like learn there on set how to like create chemistry?
I don't know if it's some, I think it either is or it isn't. It's not something you can manufacture. I mean, I think you can, you know, you can find it if if it's not really there with the other person, you find it within yourself to create it. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, but like seeing that scene with Woody Harrelson, I was like thinking, I met him the second day after I met Bruce. They were really good friends. And so when we got the movie and I had to do these love scenes with him, it was literally like having to be in love scenes with my brother. I mean, it was like the most awkward
That's
thing.
Hollywood.
It was like so awkward, like, oh my God, Woody. He'd be like, oh, we have love scenes, la la la. I'd be like, oh, like, let's not.
I did. I was going to ask at some point, what do you wish you'd known or what do you regret? And it's funny to ask that right after you just said that about like love scenes with Woody Harrelson. But like, I think that, I mean, to jump ahead to striptease, just to touch on striptease a little bit, there was an outcry about you showing skin in that movie. But by that point, you had done it plenty. You'd done it like, you'd been topless and you'd scandalized, but not at the level of striptease. How do you think about that now? And would you do anything differently? Would you have, I don't know, not done that much nudity? Would you have done more? Again,
well, what's
all connects to the
interesting?
substance,
So, what's
doesn't it?
interesting, and I give you the challenge to go look at Indecent Proposal because that's where you're thinking that there's a lot of nudity, and in fact, there is almost none.
It just seems that way because it's so intense and passionate and,
Yes.
and well choreographed.
Yes. So the feeling is that there is actually quite a lot. But to answer your question about regrets, I think that's a waste of energy.
Don't look back.
I think that there is no, like, that regrets only trap us into the past and basically rob us of our present and our future. And because it is already what it is. And I have a particular, perception of how a way of looking at life. For me, I look at life is that everything is happening for me, not to me. And through that lens of perception, it doesn't mean that everything is always going the way I want or that there isn't disappointment. But when you look at it through that lens, you can more easily step back and say, what is this trying to give me? Because if this is happening for me, and so I can look at things that didn't work out or wasn't the way in which I wanted it, but know and trust that there is something that is there for me.
That's so beautiful. And it speaks so much to your philosophy and maybe your resilience in this industry. Like sometimes I ask actors, how do you deal with rejection and getting the parts that you really wanted and didn't get? It sounds like you have figured out how to let that water off a duck's back and not let that affect you going forward.
I think it's even more for me than that. It's recognizing that I don't believe as human beings that we've been put here to be punished. And I think that some of my most challenging times have also been my greatest learning. Have served and been greater gifts by being willing to see what's in that for me. And I look at that even in, having had a very challenging childhood, and I can look back today, and you can read about that in that book that some of you got. that I can look back and say, there are aspects to the relationship I had with my mother, and that were less than nurturing, less than supportive, and in some cases quite brutal, and realize that she didn't come into this world to have any less desires of joy, happiness than I have, or to be neglectful or any of those things. And if I had had a cushier existence, sorry, my phone is going. It's my daughter. Sorry, I'll call you back, kid.
She can join.
I have to call you back. I love you.
She can join in via the watch. That's so funny.
But my point is that I can now see that there is part of the challenges that I faced in that childhood with my mother that gave me that resilience, gave me a determination and a courage that perhaps I wouldn't have had to step out to do something that I knew nothing about.
Yeah. This is excellent, like life advice. Sometimes I think the best craft or filmmaking or acting advice is also life advice, and that kind of feels like that. How often when you are reading a script or like constructing a character, are you going, this reminds me of a past role or a past character? How often do they bleed together, or can you lift from a past character and bring it into a current one?
Like, give me an example. What do you like? Are you talking about reading something you feel like you've already done?
It could be emotional, or I suppose it could be physical too. I also wanted to ask about the physical transformation of it all. Again, it all comes back to the substance. Not substance, but for something like, I did read that for A Few Good Men, that's when you really discovered physicality and you really started committing to.
You mean more, not Few Good Men, you mean G.I. Jane?
Well, I thought it was, then you agreed to do G.I. Jane because of A Few Good Men.
I think, for me, with A Few Good Men, that was really about, I think, getting a role that was, like, the gift of that is that it wasn't a sexualized role. And I really am so grateful to Rob Reiner and Aaron Sorkin, because they really took a stand for not allowing the relationship between my character and Tom Cruise to fall into a trapping that existed quite a lot around that time. And in fact, Aaron Sorkin wrote a thing saying that at one point when the studio was kind of pushing for there to be a love scene, he said, then why the hell did we cast Demi Moore?
Okay.
And so I really appreciated that, because I think for me, that role, not about it being a physicality, but it allowed me, I think, to really step into another aspect of myself that wasn't about love, romance, a different type of love, a love and a passion that was about what they were fighting for, what they were trying to take a stand for.
Which then that takes us to the idea of typecasting and what modern actors call branding or artists call branding these days, is at what points in your career were you thinking, I need to try to get a role that's different from the last thing I did? I'm getting typecast as this. That sounds like such a wake-up call that I suspected, that studios would be pushing for more love stories, and that's so demeaning to hear that. Well, then why did we cast this person?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm looking at things, for me, it's not so much. There's an awareness of being like kind of placed in a box, okay. But it's what I find is that it's much more kind of going back into a personal place in yourself that says, I want to continue to grow and be challenged. And so what's pushing me out of my comfort zone? What's taking me to a different place? Where am I getting to grow? And if I just do the same thing over and over, which for some people that may be comfortable, but it's really for me more about trying to,
like you said about the soap opera actors, some people want to plug
in,
and
I have no judgment of that. It's just really for me, it was a journey of growth on every level.
Can I ask the question again? The substance.
You keep saying we'll get back to.
We'll get back. We're going to play the clip, and I'm going to it's going to be so climactic. We finally get to the clip. The phrase, I'm not going to do something unless it scares me, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting thing. Like, fear is just information. And there's a difference. Like when we have fear that is reflecting danger, that usually means to step back. But when we have something that scares us in that way, that's saying, you might feel a little exposed, you might feel a little vulnerable, that's when you know you need to lean in and go a little further, because you know on the other side you're going to be better for it.
You're like my new guru. This is really, really good to hear. Watching this montage of clips, maybe just today, just now, like which of those glimpses that we saw were that? Like, did teach you at that level because they took you out of your comfort zone in that way?
I mean, I feel like everything I've done, they all kind of build on each other. You know, that they all had certain challenges within them. You know, some of it was just even facing my own insecurity, my own feelings of that I'm an imposter, like, you know, feeling like, oh, am I a fraud? I don't know what I'm doing. And, you know, and sometimes it was within the character.
And that's where the lines blur between actor and character too, that you don't, this is where I think we should drill into G.I. Jane. Because that, I mean, even in just that clip, that must have been such a, you're playing a character that's facing these fears. You yourself are facing fears. What was getting ripped for that like? What was that physical journey?
You know, first of all, for me, you know, if I really, you know, since I've recently had, I've had the opportunity to see some of these compilations and be reminded. I don't sit around and watch my own movies.
If you do.
I do not. I've started to really see that there is a part of my choices that are often either curiosities of issues or questions that I've had that I'm wanting to explore, or in some cases of a sense of something that doesn't feel just, that I am looking to see challenged or find another answer to, which, to wrap that all up, means that often I've done things that are disruptive or provocative, and not for provocative sake. And I think if I look at G.I. Jane, it certainly is, it falls into that category, but as does striptease in a totally different kind of way.
This is where I can ask about the what I call the outside-in approach. I don't know if that's the term, but for you, but where does hair? I have a question here from somebody in the audience about, is it true that shortly before the filming of Ghost, you cut your hair without the studio knowing, and they were not happy?
That is true.
Okay.
Yes. As a matter of fact, so when I met with Jerry Zucker, my hair was down here. Then we met a second time, and it was up to here. And I had just had a baby, and so I don't know if it was that, but we had a vacation, and we were on holiday in my first time in Paris, and I had been carrying around a picture in my wallet forever of Isabella Rossellini with this short haircut. And I literally walked into a corner, salon, and just said, can you do this? This is what I want, like, not speaking any French. And so when I came back after the deal had been made and Jerry saw me, I think he was not extremely pleased at the moment. I think he was stunned. But in the end, I think it worked quite effectively.
I think it's an iconic haircut, actually. And so is G.I. Jane, in a way. And that's why the question becomes...
The no hair.
The no hair, which that's really you, right? I mean, you're really...
Yeah, that was an amazing moment. We had to shoot everything that had hair. And so by the time we got to that point, we had done a modified SEAL training before we even started shooting, which, was me and 40 guys being put through the paces, hardcore. We were shooting everything, and just like the film, in real life, it was me and essentially 40 guys. And the one thing that was still separating me was my hair. So by the time we got to that scene, which essentially it was 3 cameras, and I was so gung-ho, and we had those clippers, and I was ready. And, I did that beginning shave, and all of a sudden Ridley then said, cut. And I was like, wait, I've got like a Hare Krishna tail. because he wanted to reset the cameras, and I was so ready and feel like it was a transformative experience personally in so many ways.
That's so. I didn't. I hadn't thought about this. They had to structure an entire film shoot around a haircut, sort of. They had to
Yes.
film it essentially chronologically and like
Yes.
produce the whole movie that way. That's actually crazy. How often does this happen with other characters? For example, period pieces like A Scarlet Letter or like a Feud. You mentioned your hair for a Feud, Capote versus the Swans. These are clues for actors, right? The costuming, the hair, the makeup, maybe. Like, do those finishing touches help you create a character?
I mean, sometimes actually, in terms of building your character, sometimes finding the wardrobe really helps to create the body for it. Obviously, with Feud, it being that time period, I mean, putting the wig on completely transformed how I felt like I carried myself, how just all of that. I mean, you still have to go for me and do your prep emotional work to really create the life. But definitely, it's always been a real anchor for me. And you said you interviewed Diane Lane, and she and I have spoken about that too. And we both, really feel like it's definitely an anchor in beginning point.
It's got to be. And then for period pieces or for any, I guess, piece of history, like if you're ever doing a project, like what is your relationship with research? How do you go about, I have to fill myself in on, for example, playing a real person?
I mean, I felt a huge responsibility playing a real person in Feud. Anne Woodward really had a very, very tragic life, and she still has family that are living. And there was a moment in Feud where there was a creative license where they had changed and written that I shoot my husband with a revolver. And I, had to go back and say, I feel like I can't do that. That may be Truman's way of telling the story, but I said, because that is not the way it happened, that I really, it truly was an accidental shooting, that I said, it's really important to me that we honor what really happened. And I had a beautiful moment actually attending the Met Ball, but where the granddaughter of Anne Woodward came and just said how much they appreciated the portrayal of her grandmother.
Oh, that's so.
Which was very moving.
Could never have planned.
Yeah,
for that.
no.
Yeah, how often how often do you get that gratification? Like never. Like these people are real that you're playing, and then out in the real world, they're like, "Thank you for honoring my." That's extraordinary. Because we're in a room full of like filmmakers and executives and artists, you wanted to touch on it was the early indie days.
Yeah.
Mortal Thoughts.
Well,
a movie with
where,
Bruce.
yes, where it was in the clips, which I was thinking about it earlier. It is an independent film, but back in that time, there were what was called A-list movies and then B movies. Remember that? Like independent didn't really exist in the way that we know it today, where it was really recognized, acknowledged for the kind of creativity, for the risk taking, and I just felt like it was a real privilege. And as an actor, it was a project and material that came so that I didn't feel that I was getting trapped in a box, that I was being labeled, where I got to step out and do something that had a little bit more character. It was more character driven, with the incredible Alan Rudolph, who really came out of kind of the Bob Altman, school. And I feel like it was kind of just right at the beginning days. And it really was for me a great gift. And I did. It was the only film that I ever did with Bruce where we didn't play a married couple. And I did kill him. Not to spoil it for you, but...
Well, that's where I'm interested in this idea that there you are on the set of Feud as an actor, and I think maybe actors are not always empowered to do this, but saying the character wouldn't do this or the real person wouldn't do this, like making a more producerial decision. Can you talk about your work as a producer?
Well, I didn't produce Feud.
No, I know.
But
No, I know. But because
yes, I
you've-
was also, that was my first foray into producing, was Mortal Thoughts, and Taylor Hackford was the executive producer. And it was another moment of truly the University of Fake It Till You Make It, trying to figure out what I was doing. The smartest thing we did was bring Alan Rudolph in, that is for sure. And the wonderful Glenn Headley was also in this, which definitely led to, how wonderful when you have community and friendships that get created. Mike Myers and his then wife, Robin Roseanne, coming to my house for game nights led into my then production company producing Austin Powers.
Amazing.
See, a few game nights, who knows?
It's also a reminder that the studio system, to your point, has evolved, I think, in a good way. I think independent film is it's certainly more respected and celebrated, but that maybe those types of connections can be made more. Whereas before, there were big studios saying, we got to have a love scene. We gotta have a love scene. But
I think the beauty is that, when you lower the stakes, because, we're talking economics here, right? You lower the stakes, it can increase the creativity and give you more license to kind of, from an artist's perspective, kind of go down pathways that, a studio would be more fearful to go. And I think some of the, films that have the deepest resonance, that really are the ones that are out of the box and that might not have been made if they were in a kind of traditional studio kind of format.
What a perfect segue
Into?
to the substance.
How many of you have seen it already? Okay, quite a few. Okay, you've survived.
I guess it's... And I don't know how much we want to avoid spoilers or such, but could you describe the making of the movie in terms of...
It was hard.
I mean,
really hard.
I mean the studio involvement aspect of it, because this to me is everything you just described. If a studio would never take risks on this, but at one point it was...
I mean, what was interesting is I was in Paris for 5.5 months that we were there shooting this, even though we had a very small budget. But because it was all practical special effects, except for very, select areas of some visual effects, it was more time consuming. And so some of the kind of the way in which the budget was used was really to give more days. It was a French director, primarily French crew, English producer, which was Working Title. And at one point, Working Title is involved with Universal. But then it made its way and home to Mubi.
Yeah, it's kind of the movie of the year, I think. I think we're going to play a clip. We should maybe just play the clip now. I think this clip we're about to see, I think of this as the scene of the year. I have so many questions.
I don't know what it is. So
great. Okay.
Do I need to get out of the way?
That's a good question. I don't know.
You want to see me act it out?
Oh my God. I would love that. Should we stay here?
I can crawl on the floor. Okay.
If you can, try to describe your mindset filming that scene, or your interiority. I don't know.
So the emotional element for me with this is one. It's the precipice of somebody who is almost able to step out of a self-imposed prison. Like, she's so close. And I think that pain of hyper focus and examination, looking and seeing everything as wrong, and where you try to perfect something, make it a little better only to make it worse. And it's that the depth of the kind of the process of self-loathing. Obviously, for those who haven't seen it, there's like 3 stages of trying to get ready, trying to make it out the door, seeing the image of this younger version, and immediately that violence that we can have against ourselves, that kind of the depths of despair. And on a physical level, Coralie likes to shoot a lot of takes, and we did 15 at least takes for each section. And kind of the, not that I could figure out if they were that different, but
Or which one was used?
she wanted to do another one even after that. Seriously. But I think that it was also, I mean, I knew going into it that this was a really important anchor. In a way, my character, it was really important that I bring that kind of level of relatable humanness to carry through where it goes.
Yeah. Through all of the fantasy and
it's the most
stylized.
real in a way, I think, of everything else. Because, one of the biggest challenges with this, and what was so exciting, was also stepping in to do a role that was primarily without dialogue. All of my scenes were really just in reflection with myself, that kind of those intimate moments that we have when we're alone, sometimes nude, that where no one's looking, and how we are. And that was a very different experience. Normally you have someone else who's kind of you're feeding off of, and you don't, and to not have that was a really interesting
like your scene partner is the mirror, which is the most terrifying scene partner.
Yes.
Or like that's that fear that we're talking about, you're saying, of like this is the kind of out of the comfort zone, good kind of fear to lean into.
Definitely. I mean, I knew going in, there was no lack of clarity that this was not about being glamorous. It wasn't about, in fact, it was quite the opposite. It was going to be highlighting. I wasn't going to be shot in the, and those things that we naturally like want to mask or cover up, don't necessarily want everyone to see that it was important that be open and available in whatever way to tell this story.
Yeah, it's this anti-Hollywood, very Hollywood-oriented movie in my mind. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, like, I want to ask about your relationship with Coralie and how it developed, and what did she? Let's start. I mean, how did this all begin? How did she send this to you? Or
the script came my way. My agent said, "I don't want to tell you anything about it. Just read it." And after I read it, I really understood. One, I don't know if he could have explained it, but I was really, really taken and moved, and in particular, what really struck me was that part that was exploring that violence, that harshness that we can have against ourselves, which I felt was also not exclusive to women, that it was just human. And so Coralie, this is a very personal story to her. I think, in many respects, and I've heard her acknowledge this as well, Elizabeth is Coralie, and Sue is that girl from the 90s that, in a way, I think she felt pitted against. And I think it was her, own, way of having her own kind of version, cathartic journey. And I think, she has lived with this obviously far longer than Margaret and I stepping in. And so the process, we met 6 times. And I really felt like I really did understand who this woman was, who Elizabeth was. I think Coralie was quite protective of really wanting to make sure that we understood, of which I think we both did quite easily. But I think for Corley, being so protective of this very personal material, had to really go through a longer process. And at a certain point, I felt that I needed to just give her my book. And in fact, I think because I explore in the book, having gone through, but ironically, at a much younger age, really a lot of body trauma of my own that was, some was kind of coming from the outside, being told to lose weight, having humiliating conversations with producers, but that was nothing in comparison to what I did to myself. I mean, on Indecent Proposal, I had a new baby that I took care of in the night. I would bike from Malibu to Paramount and then work a full day. Like crazy things. And you know, trying to kind of the overvaluing the meaning that I was giving to what my external body looked like or didn't look like was tormenting. I really tortured myself, and you know, and changed my body over multiple times, pulled roles in that pushed me to have to change my body. And so by the time I finished G.I. Jane, I had to truly surrender. Like I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, I finished that movie, you know, 30 plus pounds more than I normally am. And I literally couldn't look at a gym. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't control my food anymore. And when I truly surrendered and let go, my body got closer to what I'd always wanted it to be. And so I really knew that that was something that maybe perhaps her reading it would help her to understand that I understood this character more than she could possibly, that I couldn't ever convince her more than if she read it.
Yeah, it's sort of like I wanted to ask how much you guys spoke like consciously about the similarities that in your stories and how much of it was just understood and unspoken and like on set.
I don't think we had to speak at length. I think, you know, she just had to come to whatever place in her that could trust enough. That
trust is really evident on screen, I think. I think it's the three of you and Margaret and Corley.
I mean, Margaret, I could not love or adore more. And I only hope that we can do another film where we actually have more scenes conscious.
Yeah.
No, because truly she, like, you know, Corley's a very technical director. She's a very symbolic visual director, and which, you know, it often, the technical side took more precedence over the sensitivity of the actor's process. So having somebody like Margaret, who we just really connected, we approach things very similarly as actors. I think kind of our choices have certain similarities, and we really looked out for each other. And when you have two naked people on a hard, cold tile floor, it is good to know that you get along and like each other.
That's really great. And then back to the physicality question, because again, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, but there's some really wild prosthetics and makeup in this movie that must, first of all, is it fun?
I will say it's an easier read on paper.
Oh.
Like it's on paper, you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I love it. I can't wait to do that. And when you're sitting in the chair, as I did, anywhere from 6 to 9.5 hours,
Oh my God.
and then you have so little time to shoot, and you know, it's very delicate. You can't really eat or drink because it's so delicate and things can fall apart and people are touching you constantly. And then you still have to try to find a way to stay centered in yourself to, you know, do the actual work. But I'm really happy that I have this experience. I had done some prosthetics, but nothing like this. And, you know, it was, again, stepping into something so completely different from anything I've ever experienced. I mean, the final stage of kind of the degraded Elizabeth, it was always referred to as the Gollum stage.
Oh, was Gollum an inspiration? Like,
I think that was for her.
Thank you for undergoing that whole, like that prosthetics process, because to your point, like it's fun on the page and it's really fun for us in the audience. Like, thank you. But I really hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't put myself in your shoes.
Yeah, I mean, and poor Margaret, she had like one ear, only one eye, and although her time was less in there, I didn't have as much blood to deal with. 30 gallons, by the way, coming out of a fire hose. 30 gallons, which the director herself wanted to operate. Do you think she was getting out a little aggression?
So funny. That's so funny. What was your reaction seeing this movie for the first time?
I saw it I saw it a couple of points, but when I saw it for the first time completed, it was in Cannes with a 2,000 person.
Your first time?
Seeing it with like everything done, the music, everything, sound, and it had changed from the last version I had seen. I literally didn't know. I'm telling you, I read the script and said, this could be a really amazing, or it could be a fucking disaster. I literally didn't know. And Margaret was like 2 seats over from me. And when people were laughing and they were like oohing and there were things happening, and I kept looking over going, we both literally had no idea. Like people saying it's amazing. I was like, really? Okay. And also we finished this, we shot this in 2022. So it had been a while, just kind of gearing and I think there was a part where I didn't know if the intensity of the subject matter, which is what was really important to me, it was a toss-up. Was the extreme places that it goes, was that going to diminish the impact? And in fact, then when I finally kind of saw the completed version, I realized that it allowed for, a little reprieve. It gave you almost that distance to be able to kind of process the aspects that are so intense and so personal to each of us in our own ways.
Yeah, it's such an unforgettable movie-going experience. I do think it's the most disgusting movie I've ever seen. Right? That's not just me.
I mean, it depends on your squeamish level. I mean, I could not have told you going into this. My agent said, it's in the category of phantasmagoric. I like what? And body horror. I could not have listed off in my mind. It's not something I was familiar with. I mean, now I understand the fly thing. There are things, but literally, it's definitely comes from a very interesting mind.
Yeah. And we were joking earlier that it's funny to do a career retrospective, but sort of pegged to The Substance, because there's no movie like The Substance. And this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, like where of these movies we saw in this montage did The Substance, did they feed into The Substance? Was there at all a, I'm filming the scene in The Substance and it reminds me of Ghost, or probably not?
I think the only part that's kind of similar is that, in Ghost there is, a kind of exploration of consciousness, of something that is beyond that which we can see. And in this, the part, really that involved sharing consciousness, but being in 2 bodies. Cool. So, and also with Ghost, I thought the same thing. This could either be amazing or be a disaster. It was a comedy, a thriller, and a romance.
That's true.
Right? But I think that the common thread is really more in looking at, for me, less the genres and more the roles that have pushed certain envelopes, that have challenged societal norms. And I think in this case, it's asking us to look at aspects of beauty standards, look at, and not from the outside, but more importantly, look at how we're holding ourselves. And do we want to be living where we're focused on all that we're not, or do we want to be celebrating all that we are? And I hope that the takeaway is that there is no better you than you. And the more that you align into the uniqueness and the beauty of all that you are, I think the more creative and the more original that the work that we all do.
Incredible. I also, I'm going to take with me earlier, you said the process of self-loathing, which that's just been ringing in my head since you said this.
The process of
The
self-loathing.
process of self-loathing. It's not self-loathing. It's an action. It's a verb. It's the wiping of the lipstick. It's like we all suffer through self-loathing, and it's like it's got its stages.
Yes, because it's self-loathing is a response to how we're holding ourselves. It's based on a belief. It's the belief that I'm not good enough. It's the belief that I'm undeserving. It's the belief that I'm unworthy. And so that's just the response to that is self-loathing.
It's so beautiful. Is it safe to say, can we kind of take away from this conversation this idea that, like Ghost and like Substance, if a movie is this could be terrible or this could be amazing, then you're onto something? Like if filmmakers are having those thoughts, is that you're breaking new ground in a good way?
I mean, I don't think every script kind of falls into this category of it being so extreme. But I think there is something, going back to what we were saying about something that's a little bit scary. I mean, can you imagine Everything Everywhere All at Once on paper and trying to like put that out and try to like have somebody go, yeah, I got that. I'm in. And so and yet it's a brilliance that takes us to places that are beyond what we think we already know.
Yeah, I feel like in my head, there's going to be like, if I ever feel really cynical about Hollywood, or I Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Substance, and there's a couple other movies, are those movies that are like, this is proof that there are original ideas that can come out there and can really push the envelope.
I mean, in a certain way, are there really any original ideas? There's just the originality of us as individuals and how we tell those stories. All the ideas are already there. Sure. They've already all been done.
Absolutely. I have neglected my audience questions, so I'm going to touch on some of these. Can I ask, what is your favorite director you've worked with? Let's play favorites.
I would say I have a special fondness for my experience with Ridley Scott. One, because he has an intelligence combined with, he's an incredible visual filmmaker, but with substance. But working with him was kind of incredible, because if I was not understanding a scene, you hand him a piece of paper and he storyboards in like 45 seconds. And that was kind of, he's already editing as he's shooting. I really loved my experience with him.
Lovely. What was your favorite scene to film in The Substance? These are great questions, you guys. Thank you. Thank you for helping me. It did not involve the prosthetics.
No, some did. I would say I found some great joy in the cooking scene, because that kind of like I was able, because the specificity in the way Corley shoots, sometimes she started literally scenes this close. And so there was a freedom that I had, like going crazy in the kitchen, like when the fire goes up, that was a total accident. It wasn't really written comedic, and that just kind of evolved for me. Yeah. I think the circumstance obviously had humor to it, but it was more. It was written a little bit more intense, and
that was the scene where I truly had a moment of like, am I watching Demi Moore? It felt suddenly like, wait, you've never done anything like that before, and it did feel like improv. It felt spontaneous.
Throwing those eggs, that was all like really so in terms of it being like fun to do. And I would say the other one was really, I think when Margaret and I had finally an opportunity to do that end sequence, which was really difficult and challenging, because it was the fight, it was all the prosthetics, it was so many different elements, but it was our first time to actually both be in a scene where we were both conscious at the same time. So that was fun.
What do you want to do next is a question. And I know
Um,
that you said you're about to fly out to Georgia
yes. So what do I want to do next?
but yeah, big blue sky thinking. Like, what's your dream
Liz,
role or your,
I don't think that way.
okay.
Because I think that unto itself can create a limitation. I think you have to have intentionality. But for me, it's sometimes more about a feeling. What is it? What do I want it to feel like? And so, this has been a really busy time, and I'm actually squeezing in 1 week working with Boots Riley. I don't know if, and doing just another kind of kooky, out of the box, really. I'm just doing a wonderful week on this with Kiki Palmer, and it's a film about fast fashion, and boosters are, in fact, those wonderful, clever people who can go in and rob stores in mass quantities, and really exploring like who are the real criminals, corporate criminals, or the people on just everyday people. So it's a really fun character, and so I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing kind of what unfolds in the next year. I think the if I have any hope, it's that to find there was a richness and complexity and nuance in this role, and that I certainly don't feel has come my way in a long time. And so I just hope to continue to be challenged and to, find a way to, through my work, to show up and be of service in whatever way that I am meant to in this lifetime.
I think that's very inspiring for actors to hear. Yeah. And going back to that notion of what it sounds like you focus on what is within your control, and everything that's not in your control is.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is nothing's really in our control, and it's a waste of energy to kind of go down that territory. I think that, I look at things literally as that what goes on outside of me, what somebody else does or doesn't do, is irrelevant. How I hold it is everything. And that allows me to be able to be the creator of my own experience. So if I'm going to be the author of my experience, I can write the story and be happy, joyous, and free. Or I can be tormented, a victim, and woe is me, which what a stinky candle that is.
Yeah. Again, it's like not a lot of actors have that mindset. It feels like this is hard earned. Can we say, like, you've?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this over 45 years.
Wow.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
A long time, and I still show up every day feeling how lucky I am that I get to do this. I really do. Like it's I don't have to do this. I get to do this.
Yeah.
And, and look, we all work in an industry that's feast or famine, and it takes a lot during those quiet times to kind of keep our center, to hold our sense of self and value. And I think within that is our opportunity to do some of our richest work that prepares us for whatever is coming next.
Beautiful. Do you have parting words of wisdom? You've given so much. Is there something that has resonated through the years, like maybe a piece of advice from a mentor or from someone that you co-starred with or learned from that you've really taken with you?
I mean, I feel like everything. If there's anything, I remember Ellen Burstyn. I worked on Sam Levinson's first film. And Ellen Burstyn, who I'd always loved from even going back to The Resurrection, one of my favorite films. And she was talking about herself, saying that when she was first in the actor's studio, he said, I think it must have been Lee Strasberg said to her, you're very natural, my dear, but you're not very real. And she said that led her to do the real work. And there was something about that really struck me. The difference of, yes, we can pull off seeming natural, but being real means you have to go into the depths and really share of those places that we don't necessarily always want everyone to see. So my parting words would be embrace and celebrate your shadow sides, the sides that we sometimes judge, because they are the gems that make up the wholeness of who you are.
Which, which again, the substance. That's also the substance. Thank you so much, Demi Moore.
Thank you all so much.
Can we do this?